There's a chemical reaction happening in your brain right now that's quietly reshaping every financial decision you make. And you don't even know it's running. You think you make choices. You think you weigh options. Consider the future. Act like the rational adult you've spent decades becoming. But there's a mechanism buried in your neurology that hijacks all of that the moment one specific condition appears. And here's the part that should unsettle you. It doesn't need you to be poor. It only needs you to feel like you don't have enough. Let me be precise, because precision is the whole point here. What comes next is not another lecture about money mindset. It's not going to tell you to visualize abundance or repeat affirmations into a mirror. What comes next is the actual biology, measurable, replicated, published in journals most self-help authors have never opened, of how the experience of scarcity physically rewires the way your brain calculates risk, time, and value. Stay with me because I'm going to open 3 doors. The first door is a phenomenon. There is a documented, observable shift in cognitive performance that happens to human beings under financial pressure, a drop so significant that researchers measured it in IQ points. Not metaphorically, in actual, standardized, testable points. I'll show you the exact number and where it came from before we're done. The second door is the mechanism underneath that phenomenon, because a drop in performance is just a symptom. The real story is neurochemical. It's about what a specific stress cascade does to the part of your brain responsible for planning, patience, and long-term thinking. There's a reason people in scarcity make decisions that look, from the outside, like self-sabotage. And it's not weakness. It's architecture. The third door is the one that matters most. Because once you understand the machinery, there's a way to work against it. Not to pretend the pressure isn't real. That's a lie your brain won't accept. But to re-engineer the conditions under which you make your most important decisions. I'll give you that blueprint. But it won't mean anything until you've seen the first 2 doors clearly. Here's what I need you to sit with first. Scarcity is not a bank balance. That's the mistake almost everyone makes. Scarcity is a psychological state, the felt experience of having less than you believe you need. And the brain does not distinguish well between a genuine shortage and a perceived one. The single mother rationing gas money and the 6-figure executive who feels perpetually behind can be running the exact same neurological program. Same cascade, same cognitive tax, same narrowing of the mind. That word, narrowing, is the one to hold on to. When you're in scarcity, your attention doesn't scatter. It does the opposite. It tunnels. It locks with almost supernatural intensity onto the thing you lack. And in the short term, that tunnel is useful. It's why someone facing a deadline can suddenly focus with laser precision. Why the person short on rent can find a hustle they'd never have considered. Scarcity captures the mind. That's not a bug. It evolved for a reason. But here's the contradiction that runs underneath this entire video. The very mechanism that helps you survive the emergency is the mechanism that guarantees you stay in it. Read that again slowly. The tunnel that focuses you on today is the same tunnel that blinds you to tomorrow. It borrows against your future to pay for your present. And it does this without asking permission, below the level of conscious thought, in the milliseconds before you even know a decision is being made. Think about the last time you were genuinely stretched, financially, or even just by time, which runs on the same circuitry. Did you plan well in that window? Or did you make a series of small, understandable, present-focused choices that a calmer version of you would have questioned? That wasn't a failure of character. It was your prefrontal cortex operating with less bandwidth than it had the week before. And I mean that literally, bandwidth. It's the word the researchers themselves use because they found that scarcity doesn't just stress you, it consumes a measurable portion of the mental capacity you need to think your way out. So the person who most needs to make a brilliant long-term decision is, at that exact moment, neurologically least equipped to make one. That's the trap. Elegant, cruel, and almost entirely invisible. Over the course of this conversation, I'm going to take that trap apart, piece by piece. You'll see what happens in the brain. You'll see why it happens at the level of chemistry. You'll see the specific error that keeps intelligent, capable people locked inside it for years. And then you'll see the way out. Not a mindset, not a mantra, but a structural change to how and when you make the decisions that shape your life. But before any of that, we have to look at what's actually happening inside the skull. Because until you've seen the phenomenon with your own eyes, the solution will sound like just another promise. And I don't deal in promises. I deal in what the brain actually does. Let's open the first door. Let's start with what can be seen, not theorized. Seen. In 2013, a team of researchers, Anandimani, Sendil Mullainathan, Eldar Shafir, and Jiaying Zhao, published a study in the journal Science that should have changed how we talk about money forever. It didn't mostly because the finding was too uncomfortable, but it's sitting there in the record, waiting. They ran 2 experiments. The first took place in a New Jersey shopping mall. They gathered ordinary people, split by income, and gave them a scenario. Imagine your car needs a repair. Then they had everyone complete standard cognitive tests, the kind that measure fluid intelligence and impulse control. Here's where it turns. When the repair cost was small, everyone performed about the same, rich and poor alike. But when the repair was expensive, when the scenario forced lower-income participants to actually confront a financial problem they couldn't easily solve, their cognitive performance collapsed. The wealthier group barely moved. The group under financial pressure dropped hard. How hard? The researchers calculated the effect at roughly 13 IQ points. Sit with that number because it's staggering. 13 points is not a rounding error. It's the difference between average and superior. It's the same order of magnitude as losing a full night of sleep or being clinically intoxicated. Simply thinking about a money problem they couldn't solve was enough to knock these people down a full cognitive tier. Temporarily, reversibly, but dramatically. And notice what that means. These were not less intelligent people. The same person, on a day without the pressure, would have scored higher. The scarcity itself was the variable. The mind didn't change. The load on it did. Now, a skeptic, and this audience is full of skeptics, which is exactly why you're here, would say the mall study is artificial. Hypothetical scenarios in a controlled setting. Fair. So the researchers did something harder. They went to sugarcane farmers in India. These farmers earn most of their annual income in one lump sum at harvest, which means the same human being is measurably poor before the harvest and measurably comfortable after it. Same person, same fields, same brain. Only the bank balance changed, and it changed on a predictable calendar. So the team tested the same farmers twice, once in the lean months before harvest, once in the flush months after. The result mirrored the mall exactly. Before harvest, under the weight of scarcity, the farmers performed significantly worse on the identical cognitive tests they later aced when their pockets were full. The pressure lifted, and the intelligence returned. It had never gone anywhere. It had simply been occupied. This is the phenomenon, and I want you to feel the full weight of it. Poverty doesn't just correlate with worse decisions. Scarcity actively produces the mental conditions for them. But I told you, scarcity isn't about a bank balance, and I meant it. Here's the observable proof that it reaches far beyond the poor. Give a busy professional too little time and watch what happens. The same tunneling appears. They overfocus on the urgent task in front of them and neglect the important ones with no deadline. They borrow hours from tomorrow to survive today, skip the workout, cancel the dinner, delay the checkup, and then pay for it later with interest. Time scarcity and money scarcity run on the same neural rails. The tunnel doesn't care what you're short on. It only cares that you're short. And once you've seen it in yourself, you can't unsee it. That flash of hyper-focus when the stakes spike, that strange inability to think about anything else. That's not a personality trait. That's the phenomenon running in you. So, We've established what happens. Intelligence, patience, and foresight measurably decline under the weight of not enough. It's real. It's replicated. It's been captured in a shopping mall and a sugarcane field on opposite sides of the planet. But what is never enough for a mind like yours? You want to know why. What is actually happening inside the skull to cause a 13-point drop? What chemistry turns a capable adult into someone who makes choices their calmer self would reject? That's the second door. And it's where this gets personal, because the mechanism I'm about to show you is running in your head every single time the pressure rises. Let's go deeper. Let's look at the machinery itself. To understand the machinery, you have to meet two parts of your brain that are locked in a permanent negotiation. Everything you're about to understand about scarcity lives in the tension between them. The first is the prefrontal cortex. It sits just behind your forehead, and it's the most recently evolved part of the human brain, the executive. It's what lets you plan, delay gratification, weigh a future reward against a present temptation, and hold multiple possibilities in mind at once. When you imagine yourself a year from now and adjust today's behavior accordingly, that's the prefrontal cortex doing something almost no other animal can do. It is the seat of the long game. The second is older and deeper, the amygdala and the stress circuitry wired around it. This is the survival system. It doesn't plan, it reacts. Its entire job is to detect threat and mobilize the body. Right now, this second, no deliberation allowed. It kept your ancestors alive when a shadow moved in the grass. It is fast, blunt, and utterly indifferent to next year. Here is the rule that governs the relationship between them, and I need you to hold it, because everything else hangs on it. When the survival system activates, the executive system goes quiet. They operate on a seesaw. Threat up, foresight down. Always. Now watch what scarcity does. Scarcity, the felt experience of not enough, registers in the brain as a threat. Not a metaphorical one, a real one. The circuitry that evolved to respond to predators responds identically to an unpayable bill, a shrinking runway, a deadline you can't meet. The body doesn't distinguish between I might be eaten and I might not make rent. It floods the same channel, and that flood has a name: cortisol. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone, released by the adrenal glands under the direction of that ancient survival circuit. In short bursts, it's brilliant. It sharpens you, mobilizes energy, pulls all your resources toward the immediate threat. This is the neurochemistry of the tunnel. This is why scarcity focuses you so violently on what you lack. Cortisol is narrowing your aperture on purpose, but cortisol has a dark gift. Chronically elevated, which is exactly what financial pressure produces because the threat never fully leaves. It directly impairs the prefrontal cortex. It degrades the very circuitry you need for planning and self-control. Studies of chronic stress show measurable disruption in prefrontal function under sustained cortisol exposure. The executive doesn't just get outvoted, it gets chemically suppressed. So now you can see the 13 points. That number from the last door? That's this. That's the prefrontal cortex operating under a cortisol load, running on reduced power, while the survival system commandeers the wheel. Let me make it concrete. Two people face the same decision: spend now or save for later. In the first, the prefrontal cortex is calm and fully online. It runs the simulation, feels the weight of the future, chooses patience. In the second, same person, different week, now under scarcity. The survival system is lit up. Cortisol is high. The prefrontal cortex is dampened. The future feels thin, abstract, unreal. The present feels loud and urgent. So they spend. Same brain, same intelligence, different chemistry, different choice. And here's the piece that turns understanding into something darker. This is a loop, not a line. The bad decision made under scarcity deepens the scarcity. Deeper scarcity means more threat, more cortisol, more prefrontal suppression. which produces the next bad decision. The chemistry that traps you is fed by the very outcomes it generates. It is a spiral that manufactures its own fuel. There's a specific term for what this does to your perception of the future, and it's the hinge of everything that follows. Neuroeconomists call it temporal discounting, the brain's tendency to shrink the value of future rewards. Under scarcity, that discounting goes into overdrive. $1,000 next year becomes almost worthless against $100 today. Not because you're foolish, because a stressed brain is chemically wired to distrust a future it can't feel. Hold that idea, the shrinking future, because it's about to explain the single most damaging error intelligent people make with money. An error that looks like impatience, but is really something the brain is doing to them. You've seen what happens. You've seen why. Now let's name the mistake. Here is the mistake. And I want to be careful with it because it's the most misunderstood behavior in all of personal finance. The error is this: believing that people trapped in scarcity make bad decisions because they lack discipline, intelligence, or character. Believing that if they just tried harder, thought longer, wanted it more, they'd choose differently. That belief is not only wrong, it's the exact belief that keeps the trap sealed shut. I'm going to hold this belief up to the light from two directions: the way the world judges others, and the way you quietly judge yourself. Because you do both, and both are built on the same false premise. Start with how it looks from the outside. You've seen someone in financial trouble make a choice that made you wince. The person behind on bills who buys something expensive. The one who takes the payday loan at a rate that guarantees a deeper hole. The one who won't do the obvious, boring, correct thing that would slowly dig them out. And somewhere in you, be honest, a voice said, "What is wrong with them?" Nothing is wrong with them. Their prefrontal cortex is running on reduced power under a cortisol load, and their future has been chemically discounted into near invisibility. They are not choosing the short term over the long term. For their brain, in that moment, the long term barely exists. You cannot value what you cannot feel. And scarcity has turned the volume on the future almost all the way down. The world calls this impulsivity. It isn't. Impulsivity implies a fair fight between now and later that the person lost. This isn't a fair fight. Scarcity rigged the ring before the bell. Now turn it inward, because this is where it costs you. You've done it too. Not with rent money maybe, but you felt the pull. The month things were tight, and you made a series of small, present-focused choices your calmer self would have questioned. The stretch of overwork where you kept borrowing from your health to pay today's deadline. The season of pressure where your long-term thinking simply went offline and you didn't even notice it had. And here's what you did afterward. You blamed your character. You told yourself you were weak, undisciplined, not the kind of person who has it together. You added shame on top of scarcity. That is the error compounding itself. Because shame is a threat. Shame raises cortisol, and cortisol suppresses the exact circuitry you needed to climb out. So the story you tell yourself about your failure literally deepens the neurochemical state that caused it. Read that again. The self-judgment isn't just unkind, it's fuel. You are pouring cortisol on a cortisol fire and calling it accountability. Let me name the false equation directly, because clarity matters here. Scarcity behavior is not a character flaw. It is a predictable output of a stressed brain running an ancient survival program. Change the neurochemical conditions, and the behavior changes. In the same person, with the same character, the same week the pressure lifts. The sugarcane farmers proved it. They didn't grow more disciplined after harvest. Their brains simply came back online. So the common wisdom, fix the person, is aimed at the wrong target. You cannot discipline your way out of a chemistry problem. Willpower is itself a prefrontal function. Asking a scarcity-impaired brain to use more willpower is like asking someone with a sprained ankle to just run faster. The very faculty you're demanding is the one that's compromised. And this is why every piece of advice built on just budget better, just think long-term, just be more responsible fails the people who need it most. It's not that the advice is wrong, it's that it's prescribed to a brain that, in the moment of scarcity, is neurologically unable to execute it. You're handing planning instructions to a system whose planning center is offline. So what does the error actually cost? Because a belief this wrong, held this widely, doesn't stay abstract. It shows up in real lives, in years lost, in decisions that cascade, in a specific human being sitting in a specific room making a choice that will quietly define the next decade of their life. Let me show you one. Not a name, not a case study, a person you'll recognize, because part of you has been in that room. Picture a 41-year-old woman in Columbus, Ohio, a regional operations manager for a mid-sized logistics company, 15 years at the same firm. Good at her job, the kind of person others come to when a problem needs untangling. 2 kids, 12 and 9. A husband who drives long haul, gone more weeks than he's home. A mortgage that felt reasonable when they signed it, and heavier every year since. She is not poor. That's the thing to understand about her. On paper, she's the American middle class, doing everything right. But she lives with a low, constant hum of not enough. The daycare that eats a third of one paycheck. The car that's making a sound she's decided not to hear yet. The credit card balance that never quite goes to zero, no matter how careful the month. She feels behind. She's felt behind for years. And that feeling, though she doesn't know it, is the tunnel forming. Her company offers a retirement match. Free money. The closest thing to free money that exists in an adult life. She knows this. She's not naive. Every financial article she's ever skimmed said the same thing. Contribute enough to get the full match. Always. No exceptions. She knows the long game. In a calm moment, she could explain it to you perfectly. But she has not been living in calm moments. Every year, enrollment season comes around, and every year she looks at the number the match would cost her this month. The 50, the 80, the $100 pulled from a paycheck already stretched thin. And every year, the same thing happens inside her skull. The future reward, decades away, goes thin and gray and unreal. The present cost is vivid, immediate, and pressing against a dozen bills she can already feel. So she tells herself, next year, when things settle, when the car's paid off, when the kids are older. She isn't lazy. She isn't stupid. She is a capable woman whose prefrontal cortex, worn down by years of low-grade financial threat, keeps discounting a future it can no longer feel against a present it can't stop feeling. Every single year, the tunnel makes the same trade. And every single year, it feels like a responsible decision. That's the cruelest part. It doesn't feel like self-sabotage from the inside. It feels like coping. It feels like survival. It feels like putting out the fire in front of you. And here's what she never calculates. Because the calculation itself requires the very foresight scarcity has dimmed. The match she skips isn't just the match. It's the compounding. It's decades of growth on money that was free. Money the company would have simply handed her. 10 years of next year isn't 10 missed contributions. It's a hole in her 60s she cannot yet see, growing quietly in a future she's been chemically prevented from imagining. She's not falling off a cliff. That's what makes it so hard to see, in her and in ourselves. There's no dramatic collapse, no rock bottom. Just a small, reasonable, present-focused choice, repeated so many times it becomes the shape of a life. The scarcity never announces itself. It just quietly reaches into every fork in the road and tilts the ground toward now. Then one evening, she's at the kitchen table, laptop open, and she finds herself doing the math on her actual retirement number for the first time in years. The kids are asleep. The house is quiet. And the figure on the screen doesn't match the years she has left to reach it. Not even close. She sits there. She doesn't cry. It's worse than that. It's the flat, quiet recognition of a woman realizing that 100 small, reasonable decisions added up to something she never chose on purpose. That the responsible feeling next year, repeated across a decade, was the single most expensive habit of her life. And the question that surfaces, sitting in that dim kitchen, isn't how did I let this happen? It's quieter and far more disturbing. Why did it feel so right every single time? She doesn't have the answer, but you're about to. Because what she experienced at that table has a cost the world almost never measures. And it's not the one you think. The obvious cost is the money. And the money is real. The missed match, the lost compounding, the retirement gap widening in the dark. But if that were the whole cost, this would be a math problem. And math problems are easy to fix once you see the numbers. The real cost is deeper, and almost nobody names it. Scarcity doesn't just take your money, it takes your bandwidth. And bandwidth is the resource everything else in your life is built on. Go back to that word from the beginning. The researchers didn't choose it casually. They found that scarcity consumes a measurable portion of your mental capacity, the way running too many programs consumes a computer's processing power. The tab you can't close is the money worry, and it runs constantly in the background, even when you're not consciously thinking about it, especially then. So here is the first hidden cost. Everything else you do gets worse. The woman at the kitchen table isn't only making poorer financial decisions, she's parenting with less patience because a chunk of her mind is permanently occupied. She's less present in her marriage, less sharp at the job she's good at, more reactive with her kids over things that don't deserve the reaction, not because she loves them less, because scarcity has quietly taxed the mental resource that presence and patience are made of. The money worry doesn't stay in the money part of her life. It bleeds into all of it. This is the cost the world never puts on the invoice. We measure the missed contribution. We never measure the shortened temper, the lost sleep, the conversation she was too depleted to have, the opportunity she was too tunneled to notice. Ask yourself something honest. When you've been under financial pressure, really under it, were you the same parent, the same partner, the same friend? Or was there a version of you that went quiet, went short, went absent, while your mind ran the background program it couldn't shut off? That's the tax. And you paid it in the currency that actually matters. There's a second cost, subtler and more corrosive. Scarcity narrows not just your attention, but your identity. When your mind is consumed by not enough, you slowly become someone whose horizon is the end of the month. The dreams that require a 5-year view quietly die, not from a decision, but from neglect, because a brain in scarcity cannot afford to look that far. The future gets discounted, remember? And a person who can't afford to imagine the future eventually stops trying to build one. This is how scarcity steals ambition, not by crushing it, by starving the neural capacity that ambition requires. The person doesn't decide to stop dreaming. They just find one year that they've stopped and can't quite remember when. And then there's the third cost, the one that closes the loop and makes the whole thing self-sealing: shame. Because the person living this doesn't know any of the neuroscience. They don't know their prefrontal cortex is impaired, that their future has been chemically dimmed, that the tunnel is a survival program and not a personal failing. All they know is that they keep making choices they can't defend to themselves. And so they conclude the only thing available to conclude: something is wrong with me. That conclusion is a threat. And you already know what threats do. They raise cortisol. They suppress the prefrontal cortex. They deepen the exact state that produced the behavior in the first place. The shame becomes the next turn of the spiral. This is the true architecture of the trap, and I want you to see it whole. Scarcity impairs the brain. The impaired brain makes a poor decision. The poor decision creates shame and deeper scarcity. Both raise the stress load. The higher stress load impairs the brain further. And around it goes, a spiral that manufactures its own fuel, dressed up the whole time as a personal failing. So the person keeps aiming their fix at their character while the actual mechanism runs untouched underneath. You cannot willpower your way out of this. You've seen why. The willpower itself is compromised. Trying harder inside the spiral just spins it faster. So the way out cannot be try harder. It has to be something else entirely, something that works with the brain's wiring instead of demanding the brain override it. Something structural, something you build once when you're calm so it protects you in the moments when you're not. That's the blueprint, and it's time you had it. Here's the principle everything rests on. You cannot reliably outthink scarcity in the moment scarcity is happening. The moment is exactly when your thinking is compromised. So you stop trying to win the fight in the moment, and instead you make the important decisions before the moment ever arrives, and then remove your future self's ability to unmake them. The blueprint has 3 moves. Together, they're a way of governing yourself that respects your own neurochemistry instead of fighting it. The first move, decide when you're calm, execute when you're not. Your prefrontal cortex is fully online in the quiet moments, the calm evening, the clear morning, the season when pressure lifts. That is your window of wisdom, and it's the only time you should be making decisions that require foresight. The woman in Columbus made her retirement choice every year in a state of pressure, in the tunnel, with her future dimmed. If she'd made it once, in a calm hour, the answer would have been obvious. The move isn't to think better under stress. It's to never let the stressed brain be the one deciding. The second move, and this is the one that actually holds, is to automate the decision so your future self can't renegotiate it. This is the key that turns insight into results. A good decision made once, in a calm moment, protects you only if the tunneled version of you can't quietly reverse it later. So you build the structure that removes the choice. The retirement contribution's set to withdraw automatically before the money ever touches your hands, before the tunnel can lay claim to it. The savings that moves on payday without asking. The bill paid on a schedule you never revisit. Understand what this really does at the level of the brain. Automation moves the decision out of the moment of scarcity and into the architecture of your life. It doesn't require willpower in the hard moment because the choice was already made in an easy one. You are using your calm self to build a cage for your stressed self. And that cage is not a limitation. It's freedom. It's the structure that lets a depleted brain still do the right thing, because the right thing no longer depends on the brain being sharp. The third move, protect your bandwidth like the finite resource it is. If scarcity taxes your mental capacity, then reducing the number of financial decisions you have to actively make gives you that capacity back. Every recurring choice you automate is a background program you get to close. Every simplification of your financial life is bandwidth returned to your parenting, your work, your presence. You are not just organizing money. You are reclaiming mind. That's the re-engineering. Decide when calm. Automate so it holds. Guard the bandwidth. Not willpower, architecture. Now, if you've made it this far, you're already not the average viewer. Most people can't sit with an idea this uncomfortable for this long. You're the small percentage who'd rather understand the machinery than be flattered by another motivational clip. So subscribe. Not as a favor to me, but so the next blueprint finds you when you need it. And if something in this is landing on a place that's real for you, you already know why it is. Now stay with me, because there's a piece the mechanics alone can't give you. Because you could do all 3 moves and still miss the deepest shift. The architecture protects your decisions, but there's something quieter that has to change underneath it. Something about who you become when you stop fighting your own brain and start building around it. The moves are the what. There's a who that comes with them, and it's the part that actually lasts. Let me show you what that looks like. Not in theory. In a person. The same kind of anonymous, ordinary human being from before, but this time on the other side of the blueprint. Not transformed by a windfall, not saved by a sudden burst of discipline. Changed by something much smaller and much more durable. Watch what it actually looks like when someone stops trying to win the fight in the moment and quietly removes the fight altogether. Picture a 38-year-old man in Sacramento, a high school science teacher, married, one daughter, 4 years old. On paper, less income than the woman in Columbus. By the world's math, more scarcity, not less. For most of his adult life, he lived exactly inside the trap. Not dramatically, he never hit a rock bottom worth telling a story about. Just the slow version. The account that dipped to nothing before every payday. The savings he'd start and drain. The constant low hum of behind that he'd stopped even noticing. The way you stop hearing a refrigerator. He wasn't reckless. He was tunneled. Every month he made a dozen reasonable present-focused choices, and every month the future stayed exactly as gray and unreal as it had always been. What changed wasn't a raise. It wasn't a book that lit a fire, or a burst of discipline he finally summoned. What changed was smaller than that, and that's the whole point. One quiet Sunday, a calm hour, his daughter napping, no pressure in the room, he did one thing. He set up a single automatic transfer. A small amount, almost embarrassingly small, moving from checking to savings the morning after each payday. Before the tunnel woke up, before the month could stake its claim, he didn't trust himself to do it every month by choice. That was the insight. He stopped requiring himself to be strong and built something that didn't need him to be. That's it. That's the entire dramatic event. A man clicking a button on a calm Sunday. The first months, he barely noticed. But something subtle began to shift, and it wasn't in his account. It was in him. For the first time, there was a small thing growing that the tunnel couldn't touch, because he'd put it somewhere his stressed self couldn't reach. And knowing it was there, quietly accumulating without asking anything of him, did something to the hum. It didn't silence it, but it lowered it. And here's the part the world would miss, because the world only measures the balance. As the background threat softened, a little bandwidth came back. He was, some evenings, more patient with his daughter, more present at the dinner table, slightly less reactive in the small moments that make up most of a life, not because he'd worked on his character, because he'd removed a fraction of the load his character had been straining under. He didn't become a different man. That's what makes it believable. He became the same man with a little more room, the version of himself that had always been in there, underneath the tunnel, finally with enough quiet to show up. He'll tell you now, on the rare occasion it comes up, because he's not the type to talk about it, that he used to think people who had their money together were more disciplined than him, made of something he lacked. He doesn't think that anymore. He knows the truth is smaller and stranger. They weren't stronger. They'd just stopped relying on strength. They'd built the thing once, when it was easy, so they didn't have to keep winning a fight they were destined to lose. There was no windfall. His income barely moved in those years. What moved was the architecture, and then, slowly, the man living inside it. He's not rich. That's not the story. The story is that a small structure, built in a calm moment, quietly changed both his balance and the texture of his ordinary days. And the strangest part, the part he still can't fully explain, is how little it asked of him. He always thought the way out would require becoming someone harder, more disciplined, more relentless. It turned out to require the opposite. It required him to stop demanding so much of a brain that was doing its best under load, and to build something gentle enough to hold him on the days he couldn't hold himself. That's the shift the mechanics can't quite capture. Not a stronger person, a wiser structure, and the quieter, steadier person who slowly grows inside it. Which raises the real question. The one this whole conversation has been circling. If the way out isn't about becoming harder, if it's not about willpower or discipline or character at all, then what actually changes when you understand this? Who do you become when you stop fighting your own brain? That's not a money question anymore. That's a question about identity. And it's the last door. So who do you become? Start with what dies, because something has to. The story that dies is the one you've probably carried your whole life without ever examining it. The belief that your financial situation is a report card on your worth. That the people who handle money well are simply better, more disciplined, more serious, more grown up, and that your own struggles are evidence of some deficit in you. That story is not just painful. You now know it's false at the level of biology. The struggle was never a verdict on your character. It was a stressed brain running an ancient program, doing exactly what it evolved to do. And the moment you truly absorb that, not as a comforting idea, but as a mechanical fact, something releases that has been clenched for years. The shame lets go. And when the shame lets go, the cortisol it was feeding drops. And when the cortisol drops, the very faculty you needed all along, the foresight, the patience, the executive function, quietly comes back online. This is the strangest gift in all of it. Understanding the mechanism is itself part of the cure. Because self-judgment was fuel for the spiral, and removing it is the first structural change you can make before you've automated a single dollar. That's the first thing that shifts. You stop being your own prosecutor. The second is subtler, and it changes how you move through the world. You stop trusting your in-the-moment self with decisions that require foresight, and that is not a loss of freedom. It's the beginning of a real kind of maturity. The wisest people you know are not the ones with superhuman willpower. They're the ones who learned quietly not to test their willpower unnecessarily. They arranged their lives so the right thing happens by default. They stopped confusing self-control with self-management. There's a humility in that most people never reach. It's the humility to say, I know there will be moments when I'm not at my best, when the pressure is high and my judgment is thin, and I will build for those moments now, while I still can. That's not weakness admitting itself. That's the strongest thing a person can do. Design for your worst state from the calm of your best one. And the third shift is the one that reorganizes everything. You stop seeing money as a test of who you are and start seeing it as a system you design. The question changes. It's no longer, am I disciplined enough? A question that keeps you locked in shame and self-monitoring. It becomes, is my structure sound? A question you can actually answer, adjust, and improve. One question traps you inside yourself. The other puts you in the position of an engineer looking at a machine. Same life, completely different place to stand. Notice what's happened across these three shifts. You've moved from judging yourself to understanding yourself. From relying on willpower to building architecture. From money as a mirror of your worth to money as a system you quietly govern. And the person who lives at the end of that movement is not a harder, more relentless version of you. It's a calmer one, a steadier one who has stopped fighting their own neurology and started working with it. That's who you become, not someone who conquered scarcity through force. Someone who understood it well enough to stop taking its verdicts personally and to build in the calm hours, the structures that hold in the hard ones. The woman in Columbus and the man in Sacramento were never separated by discipline. They were separated by whether they understood the machine they were inside. She fought it with willpower every year and lost, and called the loss a character flaw. He stopped fighting, built one small structure on a quiet Sunday, and slowly became someone with room to breathe. The difference between them was never who they were. It was what they understood. And you've just spent this whole conversation understanding it. Which means the only thing left is the sentence you started with. The one about a chemical reaction running in your brain right now, costing you something, without your permission. You know now what it is. You know what it's been doing. And you know it was never, for a single moment, a measure of your worth. Let me leave you with the thing this was really about. Here's what I need you to carry out of this room. Everything you were ever told about money and character was pointed at the wrong target. You were told the problem was you, your discipline, your seriousness, your will. And so you spent years trying to fix the one thing that was never broken, while the actual mechanism ran untouched underneath, feeding on the very shame you thought was accountability. The problem was never your character. It was a survival program, older than money itself, doing exactly what it evolved to do, narrowing your mind onto the threat in front of you, dimming a future it couldn't afford to let you feel. It's not a flaw. It's a feature that outlived the world it was built for. And the way out was never to become harder. It was to understand the machine well enough to stop fighting it in the moments you were destined to lose, and to build, in the calm hours, the quiet structures that hold you in the hard ones. Decide when you're clear. Automate so it holds. Guard the bandwidth that everything else in your life is made of. That's the whole blueprint, not willpower. Architecture, not a stronger you, a wiser structure, and the steadier person who slowly grows inside it. Now, here's what I'm asking you to do, and I'm asking because it matters more than usual. Somewhere in your life is a person you love who is inside this trap right now, making choices they can't defend to themselves, blaming their character for something that was never their character, pouring shame on a fire that shame only feeds. They don't need another lecture about discipline. They need to understand the machine. Send them this video. Not 5 strangers, the specific people, 1 or 2, whose faces just came to mind while I said that. You already know who they are. That's not an accident. And then leave me a comment. An honest one. Tell me the moment in your own life when the tunnel made a choice for you and you called it a failure of will. And tell me what you want the next blueprint to take apart. I read them. They decide what I build next. But before you go, sit with this one last time. You walked in here believing there was a chemical reaction running in your brain, costing you something, without your permission. You were right. There is. It's been running your whole life. But it was never stealing your money. It was stealing your permission to forgive yourself.